Sunday morning back at my place. You could sleep late, I don't mind. Break some eggs, make a mixtape, and let it play like 20 times. I ain't got no money, but I got lots of time. So let's spend a little, live a little, cause every day the sun will rise. Wake up!
All right, welcome everybody to the Terrace Up My Heart podcast. I am Jaehan, and I am joined as usual by Lucy Lee and Dan Che. Guys, welcome.
Hello.
Hey.
Today we also welcome once again our guest panelist, Yuki Shida. Yuki, we're glad to have you back, although we wish it were under better, lighter circumstances. But nonetheless, we are lucky to have your insight, especially with regards to the topic we're going to be talking about today. So Yuki, welcome once again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we know there are many heavy, weighty things going on in the world right now, and we want to make sure to remain sensitive to all those things and acknowledge the context with which we're currently living in. Obviously, with the ongoing COVID pandemic, and then the more recent and very prevalent fight for Black lives that's currently going on in the United States, as well as some part of the world. All that is at the forefront of our minds. And though we will shortly proceed to talk about a different issue and topic for the rest of this podcast, we just wanted to make sure to acknowledge that we are not blind or tone deaf to what's going on, and we stand in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters. With that said, amidst everything else that's going on that I just mentioned, compounding things as far as this smaller terrace house niche is concerned, is obviously the tragic passing of Hana Kimura and the surrounding issues of cyberbullying, suicide, and mental health that have cropped up due to her death. Terrace House, the show, which had already shut down production due to COVID, has now officially ended the Tokyo season and has chosen to withhold the last 2 episodes that they had already filmed prior, which presumably still had Hana on the show. And I guess for all intents and purposes, this will be our last podcast episode as well for just this season. We're not even sure if Terrace House is going to come back, when it comes back, but yeah, this will be our last episode. But anyway, we have had a couple of weeks to kind of process things now, and given that our coverage has ended in terms of recapping the season, we felt it important to sort of bookend our short season with an episode talking about mental health, especially if this does end up being the first and only season we cover due to the ramifications of this very unfortunate event. So we have a bit of an outline for today's episode, and we can choose to hit a couple of directed points, but I thought it would be good to kind of also just make it a raw, unplugged sort of roundtable where we can freely voice any thoughts we have about this topic, and I guess the inherent cloud of weird, dark tension that now surrounds the whole show. So I guess the best way to start would just be to talk about our initial feelings and how everybody's doing. I know it's kind of hard to filter out everything else that's going on in your minds right now, but yeah, I guess the best way we can address things is just, why don't you guys let me know your stream of consciousness with regards to when you first found out about Hana's death and how you went about processing that. So, Lucy, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think prior to finding out, I was pretty active on the Terrace House subreddit, and I think someone had posted the first signs of things going wrong with her, which is she posted some farewell message in Japanese on Instagram, and then had some questionable things that she wrote. I think it was maybe it looked like a suicide note, but in hindsight, yeah, it was. But I think at the time people were saying we should reach out to her. Is someone checking in on her? And then after that message, someone said, oh, someone did check in on her, or a family member, and said she was fine. But then shortly after, I got a text from a friend about the headline that she had passed. So it was unlike the Kobe thing that happened very sudden. I think this I don't know, I felt like there was events that had transpired leading up to it that I felt more entrenched in feeling connected with her in a way, just like knowing that we were like, we still saw the messages from her when she was alive, you know, like there was kind of a preamble to what happened. So I think, yeah, just finding out was shock. And then I started to wonder like what people have written, because I wasn't following any cyberbullying or anything that happened with her. So I just went on like this rabbit hole of what might have happened.
Dan,
Sure.
what about you?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't. The first I heard was from Lucy, actually. And so it sounds like you were on top of it, Lucy. And then when you texted our group chat, and I was just like shocked. I was like, wait. I mean, I didn't know Hana's last name, so I was like, oh, what? Is this like a previous cast member? And then I think when I found out it was the Hana we're covering, I was just so shocked. I was like, no way. Like, I was pretty crushed. Like, you guys, if you guys remember and can attest to, I was just like, what the hell? And I think my second thought was like, man, I feel bad. Like, did we talk about her in a bad way? Or, you know, and even beyond that, like, how bad we've been talking about Rio and, you know, everyone else on the show to some extent. It just made me like feel disgusted or something. And I don't know, like, I know the podcast is, you know, good-hearted and like for fun, but yeah, I felt kind of disgusting as well.
Yeah, that's fair. And we can definitely get into like our conflicted feelings on everything.
Right.
Yuki, why don't you go, and in case anybody hasn't listened to the previous episode with you on, if you want to just share your profession and what you kind of specialize in, and then just give your thoughts as well.
Yeah, so I am a marriage and family therapist, and I've been working for the last couple years in community mental health. So I see people ranging from like age 7 to 72 for various mental health needs, and that does include suicide ideation, suicidality, depression, trauma. So yeah, and thankfully my job allows me to do counseling for the underserved, and that includes the Asian population. So I do counseling in both Japanese and English. So it's been very rewarding and meaningful work. How I found out about Hana is my mom texted me at like 6 a.m, and that was like the first thing. I was like getting my son's breakfast ready and like feeding him, and then she sent me this like news article that she had passed away, because, you know, the Japanese news is faster. So I was just so shocked, and it was hard to go about my normal day, you know, trying to take care of my son and going to work while still trying to like mourn this loss. And definitely, like, I remember the picture that Lucy was talking about on the Instagram story, but when I look at Instagram stories, I'm just kind of like scrolling when I'm brushing my teeth. So like I saw her cat, and then like, so I thought that she had to like put her cat down. Like, so that was my big like shock, is that I totally missed that. Like, as a mental health professional and a Japanese bilingual person, like I was just kind of like mindlessly like scrolling. So that was definitely like such a shock to see that she was suffering so much. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I also, Lucy texted me late at night. I think it happened late at night by the time that we had heard about it. And when I first saw it, I had to like, I think I was watching a movie or something, but I had to shut down everything I was doing because I had to make sure that it was, you know, Hana. And then obviously the next thing that I looked into was how did she die? And, you know, we kind of learned that it's probably due to cyberbullying. And I think it brought me back to a place that, you know, I was at a couple months ago when we learned of Kobe Bryant's death. Not that there's any, not that there's a bigger gravity for either of these two deaths, but I think in terms of covering something, because I do a Lakers podcast on the side as well, and so I had the same feeling of immediately whatever I was doing became sort of meaningless. Like the coverage I was doing about the Lakers became sort of meaningless when I found out about Kobe's death, and at the same time, the coverage that we were doing for Terrace House all of a sudden became meaningless because I was like, oh, what does this mean? This is terrible. This is a tragedy. And were we complicit in this in any way? Like I was kind of like Daniel too. I was like, I know that probably what we have said in our podcast probably never even got to her, probably, but just the fact that we're part of this realm of, I guess, just like, and I know that Terrace House, that's the whole point of Terrace House, that people should talk about it and discuss it. The panelists do, and there are a number of podcasts, et cetera, that do that. But at the same time, it does kind of make you turn inward a little bit and question whether or not, just the fact that you're contributing to it, does that make you complicit, and like, how should we feel about this? But the biggest thing I felt, though, was just like, I just went through this, that kind of like sinking feeling in your stomach of just, oh, what do we do now? Everything seems sort of trivial in comparison to this. And instantly, and I think we've talked about how this season has been especially pretty entertaining, and like we've had a bunch of different storylines, and kind of to parallel it back to Kobe's death, it's like, this was one of the best Lakers seasons that we've ever witnessed. So like there's actually momentum of positivity as we go through it. And then all of a sudden something like this happens, and it totally like flips the entire narrative of everything, where, oh, this is one of the best seasons, and then it's not. And then it kind of reframes how you view everything. And obviously the biggest difference with the Kobe death and Hana's death, outside of Kobe's death being sort of sudden, is with Hana, there's actually, you can maybe point to something being the cause of it that's more than just, with Kobe's death, it was, an unfortunate accident that couldn't have been prevented. With this, you kind of have questions of, could this have been prevented, because there were signs early on, and I guess just the nature of the show can kind of lead people to spiral anyways, and I think that's what we'll get into in this episode. So yeah, I think those were my initial feelings, and I think when Dan said he felt disgusted, I also felt like my whole view of the show shifted. And I think, I don't know if you guys can speak to this now that we've had a couple of weeks to process it. I feel like I have been able to take a step back and kind of realize that whatever messages she was getting cyberbullying wise were probably like direct messages or people telling her to die and all of those things. And does anybody have any updated thoughts on how they're feeling? I mean, can you separate the fact that, for the most part, Terrace House is a show that encourages discussion, or do you think that there's a fine line between, how we talk about these people who are actually human beings? I don't know if I have a concrete question here, but I guess if anybody else wants to jump in and I guess add any updated feelings they have.
I think another question I'm hearing is like, what's the fine line between the commentary and cyberbullying? Like, how far is too far? Mm-hmm. But I think like just the bullying culture in Japan has always been like pretty strong and harsh, and actually like suicide rates in the youth in Japan spike the day before school, because the bullying is very much about like kill yourself, like you're worthless. So I think it's very I think cyberbullying is definitely like, we need more awareness about it. We need more studies done about the psychology behind cyberbullies and why they feel the need to go out and dictate how others live their lives, or or not live their lives.
And I think especially in this day and age where social media is way more prevalent than it was even a decade ago, And these reality stars, or these people who even go on reality shows, I think they're dealing with something that, people in Real World or Road Rules or whatever didn't have to deal with back then, where, they probably film their stuff, a year in advance or something, and they're not getting the feedback instantaneously. And these people who are hopping on these shows, especially for Terrace House, right, because it breaks the fourth wall and they can actually view themselves, probably the third week that they're in the house and already begin getting those messages flooding in, that they're getting that response while they're still on the show. And, maybe we can address and question whether or not the most interesting angle of Terrace House needs to be updated for the safety of the cast members, because maybe they do need to go the more traditional route to protect them, where it can't happen at the same time anymore, where they're still in the house, they're still living their life, and at the same time the fans are beginning to react to week 1, week 2, because I think that has an effect on them, probably for the negative, as we've seen even from people who haven't gone as far as Hana did, with Emeka kind of breaking down and saying that I don't know if I should be on this show anymore, but
Yeah, it's crazy
Yeah.
that sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's crazy because, back to our first podcast when we were talking about what we liked about the show and what stood out, it all those things now seem to be the catalyst for what happened with Hana. For example, we pointed out how it's meta because they can watch themselves, and then they have a live panelist cutting through every scene. We thought those were qualities about the show that set it apart, that we liked about it. And now it's it's turned on its head. Should they have shown those scenes simultaneously while they were still in the house, and should they have even shown them the panelist takes? Yeah, and for me, I haven't been able to watch any Terrace House, even catching up on old seasons or whatever, just because of how, I don't know, it's I don't know how to feel about it anymore.
Yeah, I'm afraid that the show might have run its course. I think the notoriety and the popularity of it has continued to grow because of the exact aspects we're talking about, which include the meta aspects, and then them, knowing the commentary that's around. And the juiciest parts, in my opinion, were when stuff was happening off screen. It's all of this stuff that made the show what it was. And I feel sadly, something like this was about to break, or something had to break, and I know the show could probably exist, but in terms of I have a strong feeling it has reached its peak, and because a person was lost because of the structure of the show. I was thinking man, what could they do? Could they hire mental health professionals as consultants to the cast members? But then the show loses its juiciness, what I'm saying? And so I don't know, I did want to say it's definitely made me check myself. I was joking to Sally I'm just gonna go on the podcast and say we need to repent and pray. But I kind of, it was said in jest, but I kind of think it reflects on how what people see as entertainment in the modern age. And I think reality TV, what is it? It's when you get to sit on your couch and talk crap about what you're watching on TV. And I think it's something, repenting, you could do whatever you want, but it's something that needs to be reflected upon, because sure, you can call it entertainment, but if you really break it down, it's pretty dark, especially as a leisure activity. So yeah, it's I mean, this is just one thing of the many things that are just coming out in 2020, it's just one of the things that are being unearthed. in our world. And so yeah, it's a pretty crazy time.
Yeah, I definitely felt what you're feeling, Dan, especially early on. As I've taken a step back, though, I feel like it's a larger issue of just because, I mean, if you look at most of our entertainment outside of what's fiction, it does elicit, picking sides, discussing characters. And I have actually listened back to some of our episodes just to see how, damning our stuff is. And I do feel like we should give ourselves a little bit more grace, because I do feel like we treated most of these people as actual people, even in jest, and even when we're making fun of them or like talking about panda suits and all of that. And even when we like totally railed on Rio, I still felt like we did a good job of like at least posing like another side to this person that maybe other people won't do. But I think the larger topic point or discussion is just like, especially with social media these days and the internet, and everybody can say whatever they want to, because we do this in sports too, right? We don't really know these sports athletes, but people will begin to like dig into their past, what they're doing, and begin to gossip about them and why their performance on the court is not, going as well as we had hoped, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if it's just a larger societal issue that we won't be able to fix, especially because of social media, and especially because everybody wants to give like a take on everything. But I don't know. It's like, but at the same time, how strict do we limit our, our leisurely enjoyment about just processing things? Because I do think that there are positives of learning from these people. And for the most part, one of the reasons why that I love Terrace House is because of that camaraderie, wholesome aspect, and like a good representation of brokenness in the world. But at the end, these people still finding a way to like try to understand each other. I understand that internally for each of these individuals, it must be a tougher battle. But at least in terms of the parts that I took away from it, I was able to learn a lot through my discussions with other people, and even through this podcast, but maybe, and maybe this is something that they're going to discuss production-wise with the panelists, who I don't even think they were as, crazy in terms of their commentary as like an American host would be, or whatever. But I guess maybe you can give some insight to the just Japanese culture and how they take criticism in that respect, even though they know that it's a show that's meant to do that, or that has that purpose. But do you have any thoughts on the panelists and whether or not through the seasons they've gotten progressively more, I don't know, aimed at these cast members personally, and how that may affect them?
I think the cast, like the panelists, have definitely like cultivated this chemistry, right? Where it's like, okay, like there's mom and daughter on the couch, right? Like Yui and Tori-chan, they're on the couch, and then like Baba-chan's kind of like the auntie that like makes comments, and then Yama-chan is the one that is like the hater of like, he's like the foil of everybody, and then there's like the young hip voice, right? So it's like everyone has a role that they're playing. So I definitely feel like they all reinforce that it's part of business. Like this is their role. Like Yama-chan always talks about how it's like, this is kind of his persona, that he's like hating on people, and then he's he's probably the harshest. He's like, well, if you don't like it, like you should leave. Like this is what you signed up for, But I think that's coming from a place where it's like he built his income out of like instilling these strong opinions from people, whether it's good or bad. So even in the fight that we were, the big explosive fight with Hana and Kai, like even in that fight, I felt like they were fair. Like they weren't, like they were very fair towards how they reacted about Hana and about Kai and the whole situation, So I think there's a fine line in like judging somebody's behavior versus judging somebody's like worth as a person. So I think the key is that we and like the panelists, like they're making comments based on the behaviors that they're being shown, versus cyberbullies make comments about people's worth. Like, you don't deserve this, you don't deserve that, right? So I don't think anybody has a right to make those statements about anybody else. So I think that's where the fine line is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the cool part, I mean, not the, it's so tricky to even say anything, but in the progression of our commentary on Hana as a person, I think what makes it the most tragic is I feel like on second watch, as we were doing this podcast, we had begun to realize just how much she had grown as a person and how she was processing things for the very first time. And I think for me, that makes it all the more sad just to see how much she had actually learned for herself through this experience, but failing to recognize, or not failing to recognize, but just forgetting that she must be dealing with so much more internally with her fans too, who are sending these hateful messages. I do think the tipping point was probably the Kai incident in the future episode, because before that, I think she had her story arc had kind of redeemed itself, and she had shown herself to be, in a very short amount of time, just someone who was able to be self-aware, even if she's never been in this situation before, So I think for me, that makes it the most sad. And, we kind of made her our most improved player of the season. And that's not even just that. Don't take that lightly, because I do very much feel that she showed like the most growth overall. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, outside of just saying that I think for me is one of the probably most tragic parts about, her passing away, that I feel like, and I mentioned it on our post that we had on Instagram, that it's unfortunate that the negative voices, and this is usually the case with social media, right? That the negative voices were so much louder than I feel like the truth that we had come to realize even on this podcast, that she was learning a lot. She was going through this for the first time, and we had all been in that situation before. And it's unfortunate that she was going through this in front of the whole world, but she handled it with so much grace, right? And we were able to recognize that. And even Dan, you were able to kind of also suss out that your initial viewings of her, you were like, oh man, she's just immature. She doesn't know what she's doing. But that the second viewing, we were able to see that actually, no, she's really just trying to figure it out for the first time, and actually doing a pretty good job about going about it. Because if we were in her shoes, it would probably look just as messy or just as cringeworthy, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it's unfortunate that those very, very, very negative voices probably, yeah.
I agree with everything you guys are saying. I thought, of all people, I didn't expect her to commit suicide. When the news came through, I was like, what? Like, I think one of my first thoughts was like, what? Like, I thought she was, of all the cast members, yeah, everyone's flawed, but I thought she was the one who responded the best to difficult situations, and she was the most open, and I almost thought she was the most honest character throughout the season, and it was a real shock. And yeah, it's so difficult, like, that there is a fine line. I think you guys are touching on something that's right. It's like we should never question somebody's worth, and because, like, when you're coming on the show, you kind of know what you're signing up for, but it seemed like, at least in the more recent seasons and episodes, like, the idea of there being a meta narrative was like the more fascinating aspects of the show, at least to me. And so I think this was, sadly, this was like almost inevitable, like, people know what they're coming on the show for, but like the good parts happen when, like, stuff's happening off camera. And I guess to bring this back in, like, I also read, like, it was really the Kai incident that happened later that people really got on her about. And I was like, what? Like, I thought that was within reason, like, her explosion and her emotion and her burst of emotion was, like, when I saw it, I was like, well, okay, she's pushing it here. But like my thoughts were like, well, she's in her early 20s and she should feel every emotion. And it's just sad that got flipped into, a decision that can't be turned around. So. Sorry, one more thing. Like, yesterday, I've kind of been in rant mode on social media, and I really try not to be, but it's gotten to the point where I'm tired of my silence, contributing to the other side. That was poorly put, but you know what I'm saying. And I don't know if you guys watch Bon Appetit, but the whole Sola thing, who's, I believe, an Indian American, please correct me, I'm so sorry, but she's a person of color, and it came out that the people of color on the show weren't getting paid for their videos. Like, I was just like, what the F, and I confess, I went to Adam Rappaport's like Instagram handle and like his Twitter handle, and like I would write stuff out and just not hit send, but like I find myself in the people's shoes who are cyberbullying Hana as well. So it's just this, man, we all got to just check ourselves. I know that sounds like stupid and like far off or like whatever, but like it is something that it's a concern. It's a definite concern of where we're at as a society.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to note, like, I know we're talking about Hana, but I'm sure every cast member has gotten cyberbullied, right? Like, I think it's unfortunate that it just impacted her more, but it's just worth noting that this cyberbullying thing is not isolated to her or this one incident or this one show. Like, it happens more than we know, right? And the celebrities that are being cyberbullied, they're just expected to take it as a part of the job. And I don't know how to combat this or remedy this, but like maybe the super fans should also like say, hey, great job, or drown out the negative voices or whatnot. But it's just unfortunate that it seems that only the negative voices seem to speak loudest in these situations, when that's not the majority, right? It's never the majority of how people feel. It's just a very loud minority.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I think I end up always going back to, it feels like a larger societal issue that we have to deal with, because, and I think the sad thing too is I totally forgot how young these kids are on the show. Like, Hana's only what? She was only 22? 22. Yeah. And I think that hit me. I was like, oh man, that's right. She's like a kid. And to have all of this inundating her all at once, not only having to go through it all at once, but then having to deal with the social media aspect of things. And I get it. I mean, I'm sure, Dan, you've gotten it before. I mean, you're in a band. You guys you have social media. I've gotten it in very small doses, like having a Lakers Twitter account and having a small following in Lakers Nation. And it puts me in a different mood when I get into these arguments with people. And it's like such a haze. And you kind of go down this rabbit hole and you become like a different person, I mean, Dan, you just talked about ranting and stuff. And it's funny because I tend to always gravitate towards like the one or two negative comments that pop up, and I get so triggered, even though there's like a lot of really good comments and stuff. Like, it's those few negative comments that hit me on a personal level that I feel like I need to engage in. And once I start to engage, I go like, just like this dark cloud comes over me. And I'm like, once I pull myself out of there, I'm like, whoa, I feel emotionally exhausted, from this. And so I can only imagine what some of these cast members are feeling trying to defend themselves, because obviously when you're getting good praise, you don't need to defend yourself because, all right, that affirms me. But even just one negative viewpoint that you don't feel aligns with yourself can kind of just throw you off kilter, and that consumes you. And I think it maybe just goes back to, and Yuki, you can touch upon this, just like, especially with social media, do we all need to have a therapist right now, like how, and I guess also we can't go back on the show and say they should have done this, they should have done that, but let's say if the show were to move forward, do you have any suggestions? And do you I don't know if you have any insight into whether or not shows like Terrace House actually give cast members, actual counseling or therapy help or anything like that. I know we're going to go into how that plays into Japanese culture, and also I think just Asian American culture in general, but yeah, I'll just throw it to you with that respect.
Yeah, so I think we were talking about like the like the global issue of cyberbullying, social media, and I think kind of what Dan was sharing about his own insight and how he's wanting to respond is it sheds so much light, because it's like I think we all do have that capacity to be a cyberbully, right? As long as we have access to the technology, like we all have that part of ourselves. So I think yes, like positivity in social media is great, but also I think it's like a matter of cultivating resiliency within each participant in whatever social media, and I think the resiliency part does have this mental health aspect, and it doesn't have to be a therapist isn't the answer for everybody, you know, but any sort of like self-care and cultivating like social support and practicing being present with your mind and your body and your thoughts, you know, just having some sort of like affirmation that you exist and you're like allowed to take up space, you know, and you like people are happy to have you around. And I think back about Hana and like, you know, it's when she passed away, she was alone, like she was living alone with just her cat. And it's like, yeah, like she can be surrounded 24/7 by all these like digital voices that are telling her like so many lies, but like it's so painful to know that like there was no one else physically to like show her the actual truth, you know, and like kind of ground her. So I really think isolation is a gateway to so many difficult mental illnesses. So definitely continuing to use social media as a way to stay really connected, like not just surface connected, but really like, dude, like this is what I'm hurting from, like this is where I'm really at, like I rolled out of bed looking like this, you know, like just really being able to like be present and maintain those relationships, especially now with like social distancing and all that. I think even more so it's important that we continue to like reach out and stay connected. And I think, you know, in Terrace House, like you're forced to stay connected all the time. So I think that transition out from Terrace House to back to social distancing, I think that may have been, you know, a difficult transition for some members too. And I really do hope that they provide support to the Terrace House participants, but my feeling is that there's some like really elite hotshot male producers that are like, it's an honor to be on this show, so you're gonna go on and do what we want you to do. I doubt that there's any sort of like mental health check, like background check. Yeah, and I doubt that they like check in and say like, how are you doing? You know, I really doubt that. Yeah. Because I was thinking like, if this situation happened in America, like, wouldn't it be kind of expected that like Hana's parents would sue Terrace House or something for like, you know, like American people are kind of like that, right? Like they want some sort of like, you need to fix this, like this is on you. And like I haven't really seen that from like the Japanese producers, you know.
Yeah.
So going forward, yeah, it would be great if they could provide some sort of mental health or like resiliency, or at the very least some sort of like wellness checks, you know. Yeah, something to protect them more. I know there's like a kind of similar show in Japan called Ainori, and it's similar in that it's like there's no plot, but it's like 3 guys, 3 girls, and you just film them, but they're like traveling. But they use like anonymous names, like they don't use their real names. And they're like like they're not allowed to have their phones the whole time because they're like traveling in like third world countries and stuff. But like that anonymity might be helpful, but then like all the models and stuff that want to get on the show may not want to be on the show anymore. So yeah, I think what Dan was saying is true. It's like all these factors are really like what made the show great, and then like Lucy said, it just turned its head.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think at least in the United States, there is, I heard for even like random reality shows like Shark Tank or whatever, that they do have people meet with anybody that comes on the show to kind of just brief them on what could happen if they blow up when the show comes out. And then they also debrief with them after as well. And so I don't know if that's probably not the case for every show in America, but it seems like we at least have those resources available for the reality stars. And again, I think the biggest thing that's a difference is most of the reality stars in America, their stuff doesn't come out till months after. And by that time, they've probably already situated themselves back into normal life and reacclimated themselves, where the people on Terrace House, they're still living Terrace House so closely. They're so closely knit to the show while also getting like, all of the hate messages and whatnot, or even just the positive messages that kind of steer them one direction or another in terms of how to act. And so I think if it does come back, they probably have to amend that. Obviously, because of social media and the internet, there's only so much you can do to like shield people from this. But I guess in terms of what you were saying, Yuki, like, I think we can at least prep the individuals better. And, this is maybe a larger thing, but in schools, there should be a social media education class or something for the kids who have to grow up with this and just learn how to maintain themselves amidst like this all these crazy voices that can come into their life, So, but that's a larger thing that we will not be able to solve. But yeah, I guess my hope is that they would better, if they do come back, that they would better equip the cast members that come in and maybe just do more. I don't know if they got lax with their screening process like over the years, or whether mental health wasn't even a thing. They were just looking at whoever's interesting. But maybe they need to start taking that into account. Especially the younger ones who are like 19, like does this person seem like they are ready for this, regardless of how cool their occupation is or their life seems to be. And then also debrief with them. I do think that especially when quarantine hit and production shut down abruptly, that they probably should have, debrief with each cast member to make sure that, they were going to be all right or whatever. But I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts on that or.
I have a thought. I think like it's tough to roll back, I'm going to be very rough with my words. Like, it's tough to like kind of unwind what's already been unwound. It's tough to rewind what's already been unwound. Meaning, like, I don't think like canceling the show or like canceling the way entertainment is going on, or like reality TV is going to happen. I don't think that's like possible, but I do think like, and sorry to like beat this Asian thing over everyone's heads, but like, I think Andrew Yang was onto something in that, like, the idea that humans have value, and in the modern age, or at least forward looking, it's worth looking to, like, I think like our value systems have to change, like more away from like, I don't know, I think because we're evolving as a society, like it needs to, I think more resources need to be put into mental health, now that, there are fewer third world countries, like everyone's being more or less able to find basic needs, like there needs to be almost like as a part of like on the same level of healthcare, like I think like there needs to be an emphasis on mental health, because like you're gonna have stuff like this happen, and I don't think it's possible to wind back like the way society happens. It just kind of goes forward, and so that, like,
who's to say? Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say,
ahead.
Who's to say someone else is gonna make another Terrace House? Like, if Japan doesn't make it, like someone else probably will, right? For them, like how successful it is. So it's definitely like, that makes a lot of sense.
No, yeah, Dan, you make a good point, because I mean, and also I guess just how we view what mental health is. I think there's always been a sort of like red tape over that, or and not even stigma, just red tape of like what that even is. You know, what's the spectrum of I'm feeling bad today? Does that qualify, or is that just silly? You know what I mean? And I think, yes, I think as Asians, like, you know, our parents were immigrants who came here, and they're just like, you're feeling bad today, you know, rub some salt on it. What's your problem? You know what I mean? And I think we have a slightly different view, just because I think most of us here have grown up in the church and have learned to kind of suss through our feelings. I didn't know back then that when we were doing small group and all of that stuff, that was dealing with our mental health, you know, like our inner healing issues. But what about people that didn't grow up in the church and don't even have that aspect of things to really delve into their emotions and what they're feeling on like a weekly basis like we did? Now I realize back then that when I was feeling like crap and I was like bearing my souls to my brothers and sisters, that, oh, that's dealing with my mental health, you know? Only now am I like, oh, everybody should probably have this, whether it's like from a spiritual aspect or just people to talk to help them, you know, suss through their feelings and what they're going through, like on a weekly, monthly basis or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you get a cut and then it goes away after a week, like, okay, no big deal. But like if you get a cut and then it gets infected and then now like your whole arm is falling off, like, yeah, you would go to the doctor, right? But then like for some people, it's like they get the cut, like they get that trauma and then they just kind of like push it down, even though it's like infecting them and now it's like spreading all over their body, but they don't want to go see the doctor, you know?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, it's difficult because it's not visible, like not tangibly treatable to the naked eye if someone is going through things. And I think like I don't know, I think I've had like close friends who are at varying levels of depression, and it's like I think we need to treat it as a real illness, in that like if your friend had cancer or something, like you would treat them differently, right? Like you would like show them grace, like be there for them, like check in on them, etc. But I think if someone is depressed, like I don't know if we know to do that to the same extent for that friend. And I don't know if you can offer like more insight into, because it's not visible, like what are visible signs that we can glean from if someone is going through this, or like what questions can we ask in order to help someone who is going through this?
Yeah, definitely. So with depression, a lot of times like it feels like you literally can't get out of bed. Like nothing in the world will make you want to like get up and like do anything. So like even like trying to like make a phone call to like order food, or like checking your emails online, like it just is like in a fog. So I think depression feels like very isolating because you're trying to operate in this fog and nothing is really connecting, and like everything is kind of like lost. So for people in your life that may be going through depression, I think just continuing to validate what they're going through, and, you know, not telling them like stuff like, I'm sure you guys don't, but not telling them like, oh, just get over it. Or like, you know, we've heard like other generations say there's no such thing as depression. Like I lived through when like my house was blown apart and I watched my neighbors die, you know, like, so minimizing what you're going through. So continuing to just be a consistent presence that validates what they're going through. And I think the big thing with depression is it creates that isolation that we were talking about. So just trying to maintain that consistent relationship and just like accepting them where they're at. If they're open to getting help, because some people are depressed, but they're not ready to like get better. Like they're like going through something and it's in their own time, and in that time like you walk with them through it, right? But if they are wanting to get help, just like seeing, you know, how much they're willing to accept your help, like how, like do you want me to help you find resources? Do you want me to like ask people for ideas on what to do? Like, do you need help like looking up a doctor, you know, a therapist? Like, just seeing, like, letting them kind of set the tone on how this is gonna go and really strengthening their own like empowerment in that situation. With anxiety, it's a little bit different. Anxiety is like your brain is so used to the fight or flight mode response, like it's like flashing lights, sirens. So your brain is so used to feeling like there's always danger that like everything feels like danger. So it's like even though one thing is fixed, it's like they move on to the next thing that is in danger. So just always kind of like one thing and another, one thing and another. So if you have friends dealing with anxiety, it helps to do some things that are more grounding, like what's really true, like what's happening right now versus things you're worried about in the future, or like where is all this worry leading to, like what's like the worst case scenario, you know, and just kind of checking that it's like, okay, dude, like this part was real, but everything else like is kind of coming from nowhere, you know. So just kind of helping them to turn off that warning sign in their brain. Yeah, and then let's talk about signs for suicide. So suicide, just because someone is depressed or anxious or has trauma, like there's no like, then you will be suicidal, right? Like it's not necessarily that way. But if somebody is suicidal, a big sign is isolation. So like when they stop answering phone calls, texts, when they start canceling hangouts, and then, yeah, checking their social media, checking like what kinds of things they're saying, if they're like posting like cryptic messages or song lyrics or like certain poems or even like goodbye letters. Sometimes people post their farewell letters, giving away your possessions. So some people, like older people, give away like possessions before they want to commit suicide. And then a big thing is having a plan or a means. So having a plan to commit suicide and having a way to commit suicide. So I know that sometimes it's like hard to say, but you just have to say like, do you have a plan to kill yourself? Like literally that's what you're doing, right? It's not like, do you have a plan to make all this go away? It's like, no, like, are you gonna commit this bodily injury to yourself so severe that your heart is gonna stop? Okay, like that is a big thing, right? That's a big decision you're making. Like what's the plan? Like what tools do you have to do that? Because some people really do get to the point where they're like, okay, like there's an extension cord here and I can hang it up like on the garage and then I could like walk up there and then jump off, you know? Like some people will get to that point where they're like imagining how they're gonna do it and like what tools they need. So that is definitely a big one, because when they're getting to the point where it's like not just suffering is unbearable, but suffering is unbearable and I'm going to end it by committing this grave injury to myself, right? So that's a big jump. So when they get to that point when they have a plans or a means, that's definitely like a red flag. And then what to do if you do find that your friend is in a situation similar to where Hana was, right? Where she was like posting these farewell messages. The first thing you can do is try to contact that person right away and like keep them on the phone, so that, you know, you're maintaining that connection with them. And then you can try to get them to call 911 or the crisis assessment team or a suicide hotline, suicide prevention hotline, so that they can get somebody else to like take over and like help talk them down and help get, you know, an ambulance to come and assess them. And if necessary, if it does seem like suicide is imminent, in America, they will be taken, you know, to a hospital where they'll be on a psychiatric hold. So the key thing is, if you really feel like it's like that crisis time where it's like their life is on the line, the main thing is somehow like you need to get them on the line and like don't let go until you're able to connect them to somebody. if they like hang up on you or if they're not answering, try your best to call 911 and direct the police to do a wellness check. So just try to let them know, like, okay, I know that they live here, or like, I think they might be at the park, you know, just try your best to like know where they're at so that the police can get there right away and do a wellness check.
Gotcha.
So,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you for
I
sharing
hope
all
that
those.
was-
And we'll
Yeah.
put some like links and stuff in our description, so look out for that. Some resources. We're gonna wrap this up. Yuki, I just have one additional question to ask you before we do. What generation Japanese American are you again?
Second.
Second.
So my parents were born in Japan and I was born here.
Gotcha. So obviously you're very American, and I think out of any of the Asian ethnicities, Japanese are the most American, probably. So you have that perspective. Is there a way you feel that, you know, and you also have like, obviously, you know what it's like in Japan right now. You speak the language and everything like that. So you're more attuned to the cultural sensibilities. But I think that also stems to, you know, the other Asian countries over there, like Korea, China, etc. But knowing both sides of the coin, is there, how do you see that vast difference right now in terms of how Asian immigrants view mental health, and how we as Americans, especially living in Los Angeles, right? Like mental health is almost kind of cool in some way. Like you have to do it, especially if you're in the entertainment industry. But I know outside of this bubble, it's totally different. But especially like in Asia, like do you see that disparity, and is there like a way in your eyes that we can kind of bridge that discussion? And maybe after you speak, like if Dan and Lucy have thoughts, we can like wrap it up that way. But
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of the clients I work with, their parents are like, you know, they grew up not validating the issues that they're going through, or saying that they just need to get over it, or, you know, just like really minimizing the pain. And I think it may have to do with like generational trauma, because I think a lot of Asian countries, like our parents or grandparents have suffered war and genocide and, you know, just horrible crimes to humanity. So I think in a lot of ways, that's the way that they coped, is they had to just like suppress all the stuff so they could just live. So I think now, you know, we're blessed to be in a generation where we do have these resources to process what's really happening. And I think it could be difficult when you're growing up in an environment where like everybody else is like not validating that. And I think specifically to Japanese culture, I think suicide in Japan has always been a big like topic in my heart, because I think suicide has deep roots in Japan from like the samurai doing seppuku, where they like stab themselves in the belly, and then they had the kamikaze pilots in Japan who literally like went on the planes knowing that they're gonna like explode in a fiery ball of death. So I feel like there's this very tragic almost honor in suicide in Japan that's been kind of like a myth almost. And like so I definitely, you know, Japan has consistently been one of the top 7 in terms of suicide rate in the world, but more like in this, like starting in the year 2000, I think it's been going down a lot. So I definitely think, you know, Japan has realized that it was a national crisis, that people were wanting to kill themselves, and they were thinking that it's a great idea. So definitely, you know, it's a work in progress, but I'm hopeful for the future. Yeah.
No, I think like just keeping into context, the generational divide and the context with which like our immigrant parents grew up in, definitely thanks for sharing that. It gives me perspective on stuff, and kind of makes me feel less hopeless about the future, because if we are living in a different context than our parents, then hopefully that progression and progress is we're beginning to realize those things. And I think we are. I think as more discussion is had, and the more we kind of like let go of that veil that's kind of covering it. Does anybody, Dan, Lucy, do you have any closing thoughts on just anything? And we can just end it from there.
Yeah, I think just whoever's listening to this podcast, I highly encourage everyone here and to our listeners to engage in uncomfortable and difficult conversations, whether it be with your friends or coworkers or any, like enemies. I think when you have a leader of a country who speaks with his actions, and that it's really just looking out for myself, I think the antidote is doing the opposite, which is looking out for others and texting family members or friends you haven't talked to, or even people you disagree with politically. I think I had to get off Facebook because it's such a toxic place. It's just set up perfectly for somebody to have a platform and just like shove their views in front of you. I would argue, instead of like running away like I did, like maybe the course is to engage in conversation and respectful conversation with those people. And this isn't to say there is a right or wrong side, but I think the way forward is through difficult discourse that has to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're doing here as well. Lucy?
Yeah, just to echo what Dan said, I just want to say that we use the word empathy as a closing statement to all of this. A lot of times we have a lot of opinions and we just want to speak. We just want to make our voice heard. But I think even the state of how the world is today, I think it would benefit us to just listen deeply and in a knowing way, and just have more empathy to whoever we're speaking to, whether we agree with them or not. And that's my takeaway for this.
Yeah. And I think to close this all out and bring it back to Terrace house, I think, Yuki, the things that you shared about what to look out for, I think all of us, probably were kind of honed in on Kai and just, what he was going through. And, I hope that everybody's covering him the right way, pray for that guy. And it seems like he took it pretty hard too, and we're not going to go into that. But I hope that the discourse of a Terrace house moving forward, especially from those who are having to rethink their actions about what they send out to Hana, is, Lucy just brought up empathy. The biggest way to put yourself in another's shoes is I feel like we obviously tried to do that outside of, being light on this podcast, but to put yourself as if you were having to live with those cast members as well. If you may disagree with certain actions that they're doing, but how would you actually go about telling them that, to their face or whatever? And I think that's the biggest deterrent in terms of having civil discourse, especially online, right? Because everybody can hide behind their avatars or whatever, their screens. And again, I bring it back to Terrace House because that's one of the biggest positives of the show, is that people had to confront their issues with each other, but do it in a respectful manner because they knew that these people were human beings in front of them, regardless of how differing their viewpoints were. And it's just unfortunate that in this situation, because Hana's no longer with us, that we weren't able to see, obviously, that redemption or that reconciliation, because they weren't in the house anymore and she wasn't surrounded by friends who could speak truth into her. And so I think, yeah, if we can learn from this moving forward, the cast members can learn from this, the people talking about the show can learn from this, and how they, just communicate their thoughts and opinions. Obviously, it's easier said than done, especially when it comes to how to maintain being entertaining and funny and all that stuff. But I think just keeping everything into consideration and continuing to have difficult conversations, and especially for the producers of the show, having those tough conversations, even if it might seem too stringent or, too over the top. I think with a situation like this, maybe we were overlooking too many things, and this one thing had to happen for us to kind of reassess things, and maybe not totally fold everything altogether, but just reassess things and be a little more sensitive to how we do things, especially because the rise of social media has taken off like crazy, and the fact that we haven't kind of adapted to that, I don't think, is is crazy to think about, really. So hopefully that will help those things. So Yuki, thanks once again for hopping on the show, and just honestly, like, your insight was great and just allowed me to think about a lot of things as well and put things into perspective. So thank you for hopping on. This might be the last time any of us hop on, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm hoping for a redemption story in terms of the show as well, and maybe that goes with the podcast too when we re-up. So
yes.
All right, guys. Thank you. I will catch you guys later.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
We ain't got no money, but we got lots of time. So let's spend a little, live a little, 'cause every day the sun will rise.
Wake up!
Come smell the roses, oh, come take your time. Dead for a moment, set heaven on fire.